You know, when you open an ancient book like Isaiah, it's so easy to just see words on a page, right? But behind all that text was a real person living through an absolutely terrifying, world-shattering crisis. His name was Isaiah, and his story is just an incredible look at how you navigate faith when a whole empire is literally knocking at your door. So let's dive in and see how he did it.
Okay, so the very first clue to understanding this guy is right there in his name. In Hebrew, it's Yashayahu, and it means Yahweh is salvation. Now, this wasn't just some random name his parents liked. It was his entire message, his whole mission statement packed into a single name. And that core belief was about to be tested in the most extreme way possible, by war, politics, and a whole lot of fear.
And that, right there, is the central question of this whole story. I mean, it's one thing to believe God is salvation when everything's calm and peaceful. But what do you do when armies are gathering on your border, your own king is panicking, and the entire world as you know it is being violently torn apart? That was the world Isaiah woke up to every single day. To figure out how Isaiah handled all this, we don't actually start with his big speeches. We start at home, with his family. For Isaiah, the message wasn't just something you said, it was something you lived. And his own children became these living, breathing prophecies. They were basically walking billboards with a message for the entire nation of Judah. So take his first son, Shear-Jashub. That name means a remnant will return. It's kind of like good news and bad news all rolled into one. On the one hand, it's a stark warning. Judgment is coming. A lot of you are going to be taken into exile. But on the other hand, it's this incredible promise of hope. It's not the end of the story. A few, a remnant, will actually survive and come back home.
And then you have his second son, whose name is, well, it's a bit of a mouthful. Meher Shalal Hashbaz. It means hasten the booty, speed the spoil. Whoa, this was a direct and pretty scary warning. It told anyone who heard it that the plunder and destruction they were afraid of wasn't some distant what if. No, it was right around the corner. The enemy was on their way, and they were coming fast.
So who was this enemy? To answer that, we've got to zoom out from Isaiah's family and look at the whole geopolitical map. And that's where we meet the main villain of this story, the Neo-Assyrian Empire. And look, this wasn't just any kingdom. We're talking about a ruthless, brutal military machine that was just gobbling up territory in every direction.
You can just feel the crisis building year by year. It starts in 745 BC, when a new king, Tiglath-Pileser III, kicks off this massive Assyrian expansion. Just about a decade later, a regional war erupts, dragging Isaiah's kingdom, Judah, right into the middle of the chaos. Then, by 722 BC, their neighbor to the north, Israel, is completely wiped off the map by Syria. And finally, by 701 BC, that very same Assyrian army is parked right outside the gates of Isaiah's hometown, Jerusalem. The storm had definitely arrived.
So this all sets the stage for one absolutely pivotal moment where history, prophecy, and raw political strategy all collide. It's called the Syro-Ephraimite War, and it forced the king of Judah, a guy named Ahaz, to make a choice that was going to change everything.
So here was the king's dilemma. He was stuck between a rock and a hard place. Two of his neighbors, Syria and Israel, were trying to force him into a military alliance to rebel against the Assyrian superpower. So his choices seemed to be: join the rebellion and get crushed by Assyria, or say no and get attacked by your angry neighbors. But then Isaiah comes along and offers this third radical option: do nothing. Don't make alliances. Trust that God will deliver you.
The outcome was just tragic, and it unfolded in 4 clear steps. First, the threat becomes real. Syria and Israel invade. Second, Isaiah shows up and delivers his message: stay calm, trust God, not political games. But third, the king panics. Ahaz rejects Isaiah's advice and makes what he thinks is a super clever move. He asks the Assyrian superpower for help. And the result? It was a total disaster. Assyria was more than happy to come crush the rebellion, but then they just stayed. They turned on Judah and became the very oppressor Isaiah had warned him about.
So how did all this historical chaos end up shaping the book of Isaiah that we have in our hands today? Well, it turns out the book isn't some random collection of prophecies at all. It is a carefully structured literary masterpiece that is directly responding to this very crisis.
The book's structure is actually pretty brilliant and surprisingly simple. It breaks down into 3 main sections. You've got chapters 1 to 35, which are all these prophetic warnings, focused almost entirely on that Assyrian threat. Then, chapters 36 to 39 suddenly switch gears to history, telling the story of the climax of the crisis, the siege of Jerusalem. And then finally, chapters 40 to 66 pivot completely, offering this incredible message of comfort and hope, looking way beyond the current disaster to a future deliverance.
Honestly, you can think of it just like a three-act play. Act 1 is the warning, full of Isaiah's desperate pleas as Assyria rises to power. Act 2 is the climax, the nail-biting historical showdown at Jerusalem's gates. And Act 3 is the hope, where the prophet lifts his eyes from the rubble of the present and starts speaking about a much grander future salvation.
And this shift in that final part of the book is absolutely huge. The entire tone just changes on a dime. The prophet goes from talking about the immediate, physical threat of Assyrian soldiers to this much bigger, almost cosmic vision of redemption.
The contrast here is just so important. The first part of the book is like a megaphone shouting warnings about Assyria. It's a call to repent because doom is right at the door. But that second part, it's almost a whisper of comfort. It's written as if the judgment has already happened, and it's offering consolation and hope to a people who are already in exile. It's a massive shift from warning to encouragement, from judgment to promise.
And all of this entire epic story of war and bad political decisions and enduring faith, it all leads to this one profound final question. Because right in the middle of that section on future hope, Isaiah introduces this mysterious figure, a suffering servant, who will bring about salvation. And this leaves us with this incredible puzzle to think about. How does this theme of a single suffering person connect to this massive national story of deliverance from exile? That connection, well, that might be the greatest secret the book of Isaiah is asking us to decode.